Good day everyone, we are the Group 7 from Bachelor of Elementary Education 2B, and now we'll talk about behaviorism classical condition. For the objectives for the discussion for today, we will able to know what is behaviorism, what is classical conditioning, who is Pavlov, what is Pavlov theory of classical conditioning, who is Watson, and what is Watson theory of classical conditioning, lastly, and how did Pavlov influence Watson. When we think about learning, we often picture students in a classroom or in a lecture hall, books on their desk, listening intently to a teacher or professor in the classroom. But in psychology, learning means something else. One of the famous philosophies of education is behaviorism. And what is behaviorism? Behaviorism is the idea that behavior is acquired through conditioning. It is a measure of behavior by a learner's response to stimuli. A learner's response to stimuli can be reinforced using positive and negative feedback. In simple words, behaviorism is a theory which states behaviors are learned through interaction with the environment through a process called conditioning. Thus, behavior is simply a response to environmental stimuli. The two main types of conditioning or learning is called classical conditioning and operant conditioning. Let's talk about classical conditioning. What is classical conditioning? Classical conditioning is a learning process that occurs when two stimuli are repeatedly paired. A response which is the first elicited by the second stimulus is eventually elicited by the first stimulus alone. Okay, in simple words, classical conditioning is a type of learning that happens unconsciously. And when you learn through classical conditioning, an automatic conditioned response is paired with a specific stimulus, and this creates a behavior.
Hi, I am Jonah P. Castro. I'm 19 years old and I am the second reporter, and I'm going to introduce to you Ivan Pavlov. He was born on 1849 and he was died on 1936. A Russian psychologist, best known in psychology for his discovery of classical conditioning, associations of stimulus with an involuntary response. So next, Pavlov's experiment. Develop an experiment testing the vision of the conditioned reflex. Studies on the digestive systems of dogs. Pavlov observed that the animals salivated commonly upon the showing of food, instructed of a hungry dog to salivate at the noise of a bell, and which was formally correlated with the presence of food. So as you can see, I show you the example of Pavlov experiment. Pavlov introduced an experiment in which he sounded a bell before posing dogs with food. When dogs glimpse or sense food, they salivate even though it is not learned behavior. Instead, they're salivating, and it is called unconditional response. To glimpsing food, which is called unconditional stimulus, and also a dog would not generally salivate in reaction to a random stimulus like a bell sounding, since such an event is called a neutral stimulus. Still, Pavlov originates that if he always sounded a bell before posing a dog with food, then they finally started to salivate as long as they heard the bell, even the. So how did Pavlov influence Watson? First, Pavlov was the first to initiate the vision of conditioning through his experiments with animals. Second, his conclusions precisely influenced Watson and provided him with the original scientific basis for his beliefs. And for the word of the day, appetite craving for food is a constant and powerful stimulator of the gastric glands. That is the quote of Ivan Pavlov. And thank you for listening and have a great day.
Good morning, I am Daylar Cruz from Bachelor of Elementary Education, and I am reporting the story of John B. Watson. So, let's start. Background of John Rowadis Watson. He believed that the behaviors can be measured, trained, and changed. And also, Watson's classic paper entitled as Psychology is the Behaviorism, he is it, 1913. So, here are some information about the life of John Rowadis Watson, and he was born on January 9, 1878 and died September 25, 1958. He was born in Greenville, South Carolina, American psychologist, and established Psychological School of Behaviorism. And his experiment was entitled as Little Albert. So, Classical conditioning. So here in the picture, you can see the before conditioning, during conditioning, after conditioning. So as you can see in before conditioning, there is neutral stimulus to no response. Next, during conditioning, neutral stimulus and conditioned stimulus to unconditioned response. Third, after conditioning, neutral stimulus to conditioned response. Watson was interested in taking Pavlov's research further to show that the emotional reactions could be classically conditioned in people. So the participant in this experiment was a child, and his name was Albert. So he entitled it as known as Little Albert. So it occurred in 1920, and it is one of the most controversial experiments in the history of psychology. And an old infant, Albert, was selected. He was tested and was judged to show no fear when successively observing a number of live animals. For example, rat, dog, monkey, and various inanimate objects. Example, cotton, human mast, a burning newspapers. In this experiment, during the baseline, Albert showed no fear toward any of these items, and Albert was placed on a mattress and a table in the middle of the room. A white rat was placed near Albert, and he was allowed to play with it. And in this point, the child showed no fear of rat, and he began to reach out to the rat as it roamed around him. And in later traits, Watson made a loud sound behind Albert's back by striking a suspended steel bar with a hammer when the baby touched the rat. And not surprisingly, in these occasions, Albert cried and showed fear as he heard the noise. And after several such periods of the two stimuli, Albert was again presented with only the rat. Now, however, he became very distressed as the rat appeared in the room. He cried, turned out from rat, and tried to move away. The experiment showed that little Albert seemed to generalize his response to furry objects, so that when Watson sent a non-white rabbit in the room 17 days after the recording experiment, Albert also became distressed. And he showed similar reaction when presented with a fur dog. And even though Watson appeared in front of him wearing a Santa Claus mask with white cotton balls as his birth. Later, another child, 3-year-old Peter, was experimented. And once the fear was established, he brought the rabbit in the same room with the child while the child was eating, keeping enough distance between the rabbit and the child so that the child was not alarmed. Then, he moved the rabbit closer and closer to the child, allowing him to grow accustomed to it in gradual steps. And eventually, the child was able to touch and hold the formerly fear, including animal. According to Watson, this procedure had eliminated fear by conditioning a positive emotional response produced by eating to the rabbit. And as you can see, the stage 1 is before conditioning. The boy initially showed no fear of any objects he was shown. And second, during conditioning, the next time Albert was exposed to rat, Watson made a loud noise by hitting a metal pipe with a hammer. And after conditioning, naturally, the child began to cry after hearing the loudness. After repeatedly pairing the white rat with the loud noise, Albert began to cry simply after seeing the rat. So, here, the neutral stimulus is the white rat. The unconditioned stimulus is the loud noise, and the unconditioned response is fear. Conditioned stimulus is the white rat, and the conditioned response is fear.
That was a little summary of Watson's life. Facts are the air of the scientists. Without them, you can never fly. Pavlov. Thank you for listening.